Well, good evening, everyone. I hope this video version of our Luke class finds you well. It's just one of those odd weeks when Tyler and I both were out of pocket at the same time. And so, thanks to what we've learned via Zoom technology, we are able to record this message and broadcast it tonight at 7 p.m. So glad that you have joined us. And I hope that this time together will be a blessing for you. We are going to spend some time together tonight in the latter portion of Luke chapter 23 and also take a look at a few verses in chapter 24. And then we anticipate ending our Luke study next Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. And we will, by the way, be meeting live for that class in person here at the Anthem Church of Christ. And also we'll send out our regular Zoom link for that session in advance of our time together. So before we get into our passage tonight in Luke 23, I want to do just a quick recap on the 7 phrases that Jesus uttered while on the cross. And we're not going to go into a lot of detail. Tyler and Jana have covered some of these, but if you subscribe to our CCB channel and have access to our Luke resources, you would have received a handout in advance of this session. If you don't have a handout but would like a copy, please just email info@amchurch.net. Again, that's info, I-N-F-O, at amchurch.net, and we will be happy to send you a copy. But if you have a copy, go ahead and take that out now, and you'll notice that these 7 sayings of Jesus, as pulled from multiple gospel accounts, are listed at the top of the page on page 1. And so 2 of these we've actually already taken a look at. In Luke chapter 23 and verse 34, Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing." I'm going to discover a little bit of a new parallel to this tonight and just a little later in our study. Also in Luke 23:43, Jesus answered one of the criminals who was hung with him on the cross, "Truly, I tell you that today you will be with me in paradise." But there are other sayings of Jesus from the Gospels, one more in Luke that we'll see here in just a moment. But in John chapter 19, verses 26 and 27, we read that when Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And so I believe this is one of the most beautiful pictures of Jesus that we have, and also quite fascinating that the full story of his relationship with Mary is on display. She was there, obviously, at his birth, and she is there at his death, and she took care of him as an infant, and now he, as Son of God, is taking care of her. And of course, there's some very practical aspects that are in play here, but it's also a wonderful example of profound love, spiritual health and emotional health and mental health, and so much more that we see in these very, very kind words that Jesus shares here for his mother, but also for John. And, we've talked about this a little bit in the past, that Jesus had 12 followers and 3 that were in his inner circle. And there's the one whom he loved. And of course, he loved all of them, but one whom he especially loved, and that is John. And so just a very special, a very intimate portrait here of deep love for those who were very close to the heart of Christ during his earthly ministry. There's only one saying that we see recorded in 2 of the gospel accounts, and that's Matthew 27:46 and Mark 15:34, where Jesus cries out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And I want to hang on to that just a moment, because there is this really interesting insight from Rabbi Moffat that I want to share in just a bit. So we'll come back to that one in just a few moments. In John 19:28, Jesus utters two very simple words, I thirst. And in response to that, then in verse 30, after he is given a drink, the text tells us that Jesus says, it is finished. And then upon the heels of that phrase, gives up his spirit. And then a passage that we looked at last week where Jesus calls out in a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he said this, he breathed his last. There may have been other phrases that Jesus uttered while he was on the cross. We, of course, have no way of knowing that. But these are the 7 that are recorded from us. And there are multiple Old Testament ties. We've already explored some of those. And so we're not going to go into a lot of detail on that during this particular session. But one that is really intriguing and one that I do want to focus in on is a tie from Psalm 22. And there's lots of imagery, not just about the crucifixion, but even events that take place during and after the crucifixion that point to Psalm 22 as a major, perhaps the most significant of the Messianic Psalms. So Rabbi Evan Moffick has written a book called What Every Christian Needs to Know About the Jewishness of Jesus. And this has been a thoroughly enjoyable read for me personally. If you're interested, there's the book you may want to order since we're done with the class. If someone would like to borrow my copy, you're welcome to it. First come, first serve. But anyway, in his observations, and he is as he's writing about Jesus through very Jewish eyes, not only eyes but ears and values and history. Makes some really intriguing observations related to this phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me? And he actually pushes back on the idea from some scholars that this is a rejection of God or a rejection of the work of God in this particular situation. But he points to something different. And I just thought this was so intriguing. And he writes, and I'd like, if you have your handout with you, to just circle some key words or phrases that jump out at you. And if you don't have a handout, then you can just follow along as you listen. So Evan Moffick writes, we can make sense of Jesus's question, the question, my God, why have you forsaken me, when we view it through a Jewish theological lens. It's not a statement, it's a cry. It's not a declaration of faith, it's a question emerging out of intimate love. It fits squarely with the Jewish biblical tradition. The first hint of this truth is in the source of the quotation. And as we think about David writing Psalm 22, Moffick notes, King David had an intimate relationship with God. He too cried out several times. King Saul pursued him, when when his friend Jonathan was killed, when he and his men were on the run. And all these times, David cries out to God. And later he writes, but as he cries, God is not far away. God hears him. God will save him. And the cry then becomes an affirmation because God is close. Because God hears David's pain, God will respond. And rather than signify lack of faith, the cry of despair testifies to God's presence and to David's trust. And so he closes with this thought. When David cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He is expressing the cry of Jewish giants of faith. And if we had time, we would go back and look at all of the examples that are listed there as Moses cries out to God, and the list goes on and on. Abraham cries out to God, and so many others that we see in the Old Testament. And so when Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He is expressing the cry of the Jewish giants of faith. He is asking a question that itself testifies to God's abiding presence. So we have to keep in mind, I think we've exhausted this quite often in our conversation, that we have a tendency to see the ministry of Jesus through Western eyes. That's our lived experience. But to see Jesus through the theological lens of Judaism, particularly since Jesus obviously was Jewish and came to fulfill the Jewish scriptures, then seeing his ministry through that lens, and not just his ministry, but his messiahship, his supernatural power, his teaching, his understanding of kingdom and preaching and teaching of kingdom, seeing all of that through a Jewish theological lens helps us, I think, draw even closer to Jesus and understanding who he is, what he is about, and how we fit into that narrative that's been unfolding since the very, very beginning. And so that brings us to our text for today. I just thought it would be good to share that preview and see those sayings together. We could spend lots and lots of time on that. But for now, we'll go ahead and get into Luke chapter 23. I want to start tonight in verse 50. We're about to encounter an individual called Joseph of Arimathea. And he is mentioned in all four gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it is important to note here that this is not just showing us that Joseph of Arimathea is a good man or a kind man. There's a much greater message that is embedded into this particular account. So we see many Jewish leaders rejecting Jesus. We see Jewish leaders conspiring even to have Jesus killed, even conspiring with Rome, who at that particular time, of course, would have been considered the primary enemy of the Jewish people, but not Joseph of Arimathea. He is presented in contrast to everything that is not good about those leaders that crucified Jesus, and instead is presented as a good man, a righteous man. So let's see how the text portrays him, beginning in Luke 23 and verse 50. Now there was a man named Joseph, a member of the council, a good and upright man, who had not consented to their decision and action. That, of course, would be the decision and action of the council. He came from the Judean town of Arimathea, and he himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. Now, this is going to be really important because Joseph here is an individual, but he represents also a type of individual who was trusting in the promises of Ezekiel 37. So hold on to that. We'll come back to that here in just a few moments. So he came from the Judean town of Arimathea, and he himself was waiting on the kingdom of God. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus's body, and then he took it down, wrapped it in linen cloth, and laid it in a tomb cut in the rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. It was preparation day for the Sabbath, and the Sabbath was about to begin. So Joseph here is identified as good and righteous. By the way, the centurion had just said the same thing about Jesus earlier in Luke 23 and verse 47. There's also a clarification here that he is a member of the council, but he does not consent to the council's actions. That adjective shows us a double meaning. He was righteous in the sense of his obedience to God, but he was also innocent in the plot to kill Jesus. And that's an observation from Garland and Arnold. I love this quote by Joel Green in the new international commentary series on the Gospel of Luke. Green writes, even though he was a member of the council, Council, He did not agree with its counsel, Counsel. So even though he was a member of the council, he did not agree with its counsel. And so earlier I mentioned that Joseph of Arimathea is presented here as a righteous individual, but he also represents a type of Jewish believers who were hoping and trusting in the promises of Ezekiel 37. And so hold on again to that thought. I want to take just a few moments here to deviate with a little bit more information related to who he was, but then also how he figures into this greater prophetic narrative. So Joseph is rich, according to Matthew. He is prominent, according to Mark. And so we see here an interesting, it's just tidbits that are so fascinating, I think, because in many ways, prominence and richness, counsel, Jewish leader, all of these have been used many times throughout Luke to describe those who are opposed to kingdom. But there's something very redemptive in Joseph of Arimathea as a person, but also as a type of person who believed in Jesus as Messiah. A couple of things of interest here. The Romans typically would not allow burial for people who had been sentenced to death. One of the additional ways that someone who was crucified by the Romans was for their body to remain exposed to carrion and other factors that would have just added to the humiliation, making their death even more dishonorable. But Jews were highly offended by a rotting corpse and all that was associated with a corpse as it relates to death, and considered burying the dead in a very loving way, in a very careful way, in a very honorable way, to align with the teachings of Scripture, and also with pious service that exemplified the heart of a follower of Yahweh. And so we have some scriptures, for example, Deuteronomy chapter 21, that shows that even a criminal's body, leaving a criminal's body on a tree throughout the night defiled the land. And so we see some of the stipulations related to uncleanness. And we have this wonderful contrast then of Joseph of Arimathea, who does the right thing, and he takes the initiative to bury Jesus. I think this is an interesting observation by Garland and Arnold that, Joseph had to have some measure of clout. Perhaps this helps us understand some of the superlatives that Matthew and Mark use, and the more spiritually minded superlatives that Luke uses. But a pretty bold move to go to Pilate, who had already pretty much had his fill of this whole situation and interacting with the Jews related to the trial of Jesus. And so by Joseph going to him, it says something about the clout that Joseph carries and his reputation. And so we don't know what motivated Pilate to turn him loose, but he did. Maybe one last little bit of acknowledgement that Jesus wasn't guilty of any particular crime, and so maybe salving of his consciousness in some way. It's almost impossible to tell, obviously. But regardless of what Pilate is motivated by, Joseph is motivated by something much purer, and also becomes part of the fulfillment of the prophetic narrative, because Jesus is dead. And so he can't transport himself to the tomb from which he will be resurrected. And so Joseph takes care of the body. He puts him in a new tomb. This is messianic language. It's very similar to Jesus riding a colt that had never been ridden in Luke chapter 19. And they're small things, but they're significant when you begin to put them together and see these tidbits of messianic themes that permeate the entire story. And I do think this is an interesting observation by Garland and Arnold. Again, if you've got your handout, you can follow along, and if not, you can listen and follow along with what I'm about to read here. But he says that the statement that the tomb has never been used needs clarification. Jews who could afford a tomb practiced what's called secondary burial, and this is a foreign concept to us, but would have been just as normal to them as us going to the funeral home and making arrangements for our bodies to be taken care of once we passed away. But the Jews, when they would bury someone, would actually wait until the body had decomposed, and then they would gather the bones and would place those bones in an ossuary box. You may remember from several years ago, there was a bit of archaeological controversy when archaeologists thought that the bones of Jesus's brother had been discovered. And so they found an ossuary box of James. And I believe that's still debated. My memory is a little fuzzy on the validity of that. Some scholars saying yes, it is, and some scholars saying it's actually a fake. But regardless of that particular instance, bones were packed into these ossuary boxes, and then that allowed tombs to be reused. And so they could have had multiple occupants. But this is an interesting observation by Garland and Arnold. The coffinless body would be placed in a niche cut horizontally into the wall of the tomb chamber or on a low bench. Joseph wraps Jesus in a linen cloth because his clothing has already been confiscated, and it was regarded as disgraceful to be buried naked. So when the body of Jesus is placed into the tomb and the body is wrapped in linen cloth, it's intriguing that later we're going to read that when Peter looks into the tomb, all he sees is the linen cloth. And according to some scholars, that linen cloth actually had some value. So if grave robbers would have taken the body of Jesus, they would have taken the linen cloth as well. But the linen cloth is there. So one more very small way to indicate that Jesus is indeed the promised Messiah. He is the Son of God who would be raised from the dead. The day of preparation is the context, time-wise, from where we are in the story, and that refers to the time from Thursday evening to Friday evening when everything is being prepared for Sabbath, because we can't work on the Sabbath. And so Joseph was probably pressed for time here as sundown was approaching. And that may not be the only reason. A decomposing body in a warmer climate typically demands quick burial anyway. But even if that's not the case, there are some allowances that are made for the burial of corpses, even if that happens on preparation day, or for that matter, on the Sabbath. And the same thing would have been true for the women who carried spices to the tomb on Sabbath day. There were exceptions that were allowed. We don't know how long Jesus is actually in the tomb. It could be as little as 26 hours. For example, if I say hypothetically, I'm going to Tyler, Texas for 3 days. Well, I may leave at 4:00 tomorrow and be there all day Thursday, and then leave at 10 a.m. on Friday morning. I'm not there 72 hours, but I'm there for 3 days. And so it's really impossible to tell exactly how much time Jesus spent in the tomb. But as I point out in the notes, scholars do debate this kind of thing back and forth. And, I want to be more wowed by the resurrection than trying to figure out to the letter how long Jesus was in the ground. The most important piece of this is that he resurrected, that he was dead and then he was alive. And if we do not believe that, then Christianity, quite frankly, is meaningless. And so we do believe everything that we believe rests on that one promise that Jesus Christ physically died and was resurrected, that he came back to life. And as a result of that, so will all who believe in him. There is an interesting observation here with some ties that are, I think we could say directly, they're direct ties, but there are also some indirect ties. And I just want to explore this with you here just for a few moments. Again, when we think about this idea of 3 days. So Jesus in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 41 made this observation: the men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here. So remember, Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of a great fish, and there are some parallels to Jesus in the tomb and Jonah in the belly of the fish. Not necessarily for Jesus himself, although there are some parallels there, but there are also parallels for Jesus's followers. And so they, experienced 3 days of darkness. What ifs, wondering, fear, not being able to see, wrestling with their own thoughts, we'll name the spectrum, right? In many ways, similar to a lot of the emotions that Jonah would have experienced while in the belly of the fish. And this is quite fascinating. There is at least one Midrash author, and the Midrash is basically the Hebrew commentary on the Old Testament. It's an ancient text about the ancient text. And so one of the Midrash authors noted that Pharaoh was the king of Nineveh. And that's impossible from an actual timeline unless Pharaoh lived to be, 600 years old or whatever. But as we have discovered in our studies of Luke, Herod may not always be talking about a specific person. The title Herod could just represent monarchy or leaders that are opposed to the kingdom of God. And so Pharaoh, in the minds of many Jewish people, was the greatest form of evil that was personified on the earth because of slavery and the horrible abuse of God's people. One of the Midrash authors says, though, that the king of Nineveh was Pharaoh. And metaphorically, what's so powerful about that is if his heart can be turned to God, then there's hope for all of us. So some intriguing parallels, some that are quite easy to see and some that are more speculative and are to be interpreted metaphorically. But some intriguing parallels to think about this time that Jesus spent in the tomb and the time that Jonah spent in the belly of the great fish. Not just parallels for Jesus, but also parallels for the followers of Jesus. The text continues, Luke 23, verses 55 and 56. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. And then they went home and they prepared spices and perfumes, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment. So again, all of this is happening pretty quickly. It's important to note that Mark records that the women watched where Jesus was laid. And we see that in Mark chapter 15:47. But Luke describes that they watched how the body was laid. And that could explain why they prepare spices to anoint his body. And Sabbath laws are preventing customary preparation when it's first laid in the tomb. And so this is an intriguing observation here that Luke presents Jesus's life as one that begins with his family following the prescriptions of the law and ends with his followers doing the same thing. And so I don't know if we're able to see this terribly clearly or not, but the Jews have been cast in a fairly negative light in a lot of the Lucan narrative. But here we're starting to see Jews cast in a more positive light, or Jewish belief as it is expressed behaviorally and attitudinally. And I think that's important. And I think we'll be able to make a little bit more sense of that when we dig a little deeper into the text. So beginning in verse 1 of chapter 24. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared, and they went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. And while they were wondering about this, suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. And in their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners and be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." And then they remembered his words. So we have several things that are happening here that are worthy of explanation and investigation. So the angels speak in unison, and this is quite fascinating. It's a technique that validates their witness. Tyler's talked quite a bit about that during our study, that two witnesses or three witnesses validates an eyewitness report. And then we also see here when the women bow down before these angelic beings, that parallels earlier responses in Luke. Anytime that an angelic being appears and are told, don't be afraid. We don't see that language in Luke, but the response is similar to that which we have seen before. It is intriguing here that in Matthew's version and in Mark's version, there is no invitation to investigate the tomb. What we see in Luke that's different is that there's a little bit of a rebuke. That may not be the right word. Some pushback maybe, or not even really sure of a phrase that does justice to what the angelic beings are trying to help them understand here. Maybe just a very straightforward, make sure you're focusing on the right thing kind of challenge. But they say, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" Interesting question. It's like, hey, dead men who aren't dead anymore, they're not going to hang around a cemetery. They're not going to hang around a grave. So he's not here. And there is this phrase then that they remembered his words in verse 8. And I don't think this means they forgot, oh my goodness, we completely forgot about all the teachings of Jesus. I think it would be better to translate this almost as, and then it dawned on them. And then they had this phenomenal aha moment. and they hit him like a ton of bricks. It's true. It's true. Everything he told us is true. And you almost can see, if we focus on the scene, we almost can see their facial expressions changing, perhaps color draining from their face, perhaps their heart rate dramatically increasing, perhaps this phenomenal rush of adrenaline. Who knows? We all know what it's like to receive incredible news that we were hoping for, and then when we get that news, it's just our even our physical response is quite amazing. But the women respond then accordingly, and they run enthusiastically to the 11 apostles who are left and other disciples who are gathered with them, and they report that the tomb is indeed empty. And we'll circle back to that here in just a few moments. It's really intriguing in the context of resurrection that the phrase "Son of Man" is used. And there's something going on here that, as we just read through this, our English Bibles with our Western eyes, that we can so easily miss a pretty powerful tie to an Old Testament prophetic passage, and that is Ezekiel chapter 37. And so I want to read a portion of this. Please take your Bible out, and I've got a little bit of this listed in the handout. But what I actually would like to do is, since we've got a little bit of time, we're not doing any questions tonight. I'd like to read from Ezekiel and go ahead and just look at this entire chapter and help us set then a greater context for what's going on here. In Ezekiel chapter 37, beginning at verse 1, the hand of the Lord was upon me. And so Ezekiel is having this prophetic vision, or hearing the voice of God in this prophetic state. The hand of the Lord is upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley, and it was full of bones. And he led me back and forth among them. And I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. And he asked me, "Son of man, can these bones live?" So you see the Son of Man reference here in Ezekiel. And I said, "Oh, sovereign Lord, you alone know." And then he said to me, "Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. And this is what the sovereign Lord says to those bones: I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you, and I will make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. And then you will know that I am the Lord." And so I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. And then he said to me, "Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of Man, and say to it," and there's the Son of Man reference again, "This is what the sovereign Lord says: Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain, that they may live." And so I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them, and they came to life and stood on their feet, a vast army. And then he said to me, "Son of man," one more time, "these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone. We are cut off." Very important phrase. "Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says: O my people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them, and I will bring you back to the land of Israel. And then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord. When I open your graves and bring you up from them, I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. And then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken." Interesting that also could be translated breathed. It takes breath to speak. So the breath of the Lord ties back to the breath of the dry bones. "And I have done it, declares the Lord." Another way to say that is, it's finished. I'll finish what I started. So all kinds of parallels here from Ezekiel 37, and that's not all. We could keep reading, and I'll make a couple of other allusions here in just a sec, but amazing prophetic passage that ties and is reflected so powerfully in this resurrection narrative. A couple things you may not know, that this passage of Scripture actually still echoes in modern Israeli thought. Surely, even as in America, it's out of the conscious awareness of a lot of people, at least I suppose, just like a lot of our religious values are out of the minds of a lot of people based on our founding. But for the Jewish people, think about Israel's national anthem. There is a phrase, Hatikva, in the anthem, which means the hope. And that phrase comes directly from Ezekiel chapter 37. And there is a lengthier phrase in the Israeli anthem, and I'm not going to try to actually read the Hebrew. There was a time in my life when I could, but I'm very rusty these days on my Hebrew. But this phrase means our hope is not lost. The hope of 2,000 years. Now that phrase is actually a counter. It's an affirmation, but it's a counter. It's like Scripture yells, prophesies, our hope is lost, and Israel responds back, our hope is not lost. So it's a counter affirmation to Ezekiel 37, verse 11, which that passage says our hope is lost. We are cut off. But the counter affirmation is that our hope was never lost. And so Israel believes in a Messiah. Of course, there are very many modern Jews who do not believe that Jesus was the Messiah, but they still believe that a Messiah is coming. However, at this time, there were many Jews who did believe that Jesus was indeed the Messiah. And so when we think about that, it actually makes Ezekiel chapter 37 even that much more meaningful for what they were thinking at this moment in time when Jesus rose from the grave. A couple things to consider. Typically, Ezekiel 37 is read during Passover week because most Jews believe that that's when the Messiah would appear during Passover, during the time of Passover. Jesus's death and resurrection parallels then with the death and rebirth of Israel from Ezekiel 37. The Son of Man references, the reference that we see here in Luke 24, and the reference says plural that we see in Ezekiel 37, also ties the resurrection narrative to the prophetic narrative from Ezekiel. And also we see the Spirit giving life to the dead. And if you remember in Matthew's account, in Matthew chapter 27, he reported that bodies actually came up from their graves and walked into town and actually interacted with people or were seen by people. And we also have, and again, try to think about what the believers, the Jewish believers, as they understand that the Messiah has come back to life, try to think about what was going through their minds. And it wasn't just awe over the fact that somebody had come back from the grave. This was the fulfillment of hundreds of years of prophecy and hope and release and renewal and repentance and change and restoration. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But in their minds, not only is a descendant of David going to to rule. A descendant of David is going to unite the two kingdoms. The northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah are going to come together, and they're going to now be under one banner again. And not only is that descendant of David going to bring the two nations together, that descendant of David is going to also lead the nation of Israel in triumph over all other political powers and free them from the spiritual power of sin. Matter of fact, if we look in Ezekiel 37, just read down a little bit farther in verse 23. Let's back up a little bit in 22. I will make them one nation in the land. On the mountains of Israel, there will be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms. They will no longer defile themselves with their idols and vile images or with any of their offenses, for I will save them from all their sinful backsliding. And so we see even conquering over spiritual sin as well. And so one of the things that I point out here in the notes is that it's not just seeing Jesus alive that motivates them to race to the tomb. It is the fulfillment of messianic prophecy that he is indeed the one. And we have to keep in mind at this point that they could not have had full conscious awareness of this prior to the resurrection, because had they had full conscious awareness, then things may not have played out as they needed to play out in order for this prophecy to be fulfilled. And so in part, their thoughts were not complete. Discombobulated is not the right word, but they just didn't have all of the information that they needed to fully understand who Jesus is until after he is resurrected. And so now that we see that, then we start to see them act like a people who believe in a resurrected Messiah. Luke 24, beginning in verse 9. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. It's one of those sections where our English kind of gets in the way, our English vocabulary and understanding of words gets in the way of really what's going on here. So a couple of things to think about. Joanna is mentioned here first. This is quite intriguing to me. She, I don't think, is mentioned in the other accounts. I think we see her name in Luke chapter 8 as one member of the entourage, and so she's been a faithful disciple to the very end. But because Luke mentions her as a specific part of the party here, it's quite plausible that she was actually one of the eyewitnesses that Luke interviewed when he was putting his account together. And so that's just quite fascinating. No way to know that for sure, of course, but intriguing to think about her adding to the legitimacy of this eyewitness account, because obviously she was there. It's also intriguing that the very first people to the tomb and the very first people to report back to the apostles are women. And why is this significant? Well, we've said from the very beginning that women typically did not have a lot of standing in Jesus's day. And so even as resurrected Lord, he is continuing to flip societal narratives related to stratification, who is important, what it means to be in community, redefining disenfranchisement and flipping it on its head and giving those who are on the outside looking in the opportunity to be insiders And so we see that played out here, very much like in John 4, the woman at the well, is one of the very first Christian missionaries. And she was a woman who definitely was on the outside looking in, but Jesus brings something very different, very new and very fresh. And I think it teaches us, at least hopefully it teaches us a lot about how we view people and their giftedness and their talents and their strengths, and where all humankind belongs, when we think about the kingdom of God and what he's trying to get that kingdom to bring. So it is a little bit interesting to me that Jesus's followers at first are skeptical, but as I mentioned, certain things still need to play out for the timeline to make sense. Jesus is going to ascend 50 days later. And so that's no small coincidence there. If we look in Acts chapter 1, we're going to note that there is a reason that the timeline needed to play out even post resurrection, because Jesus, as he is sharing his thoughts, says to them, it's not for you to know, Acts chapter 1, verse 7, it's not for you to know the times or dates that the Father has set by his own authority. They've asked, Lord, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Another way we could look at this is, Lord, are you going to fulfill the prophecy of Ezekiel 37? And his reply, it's not for you to know the times or the dates the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And so 50 days post Passover, we then see in Acts chapter 2 that the Holy Spirit comes on Pentecost. And so Jesus has all of this in control, and part of that lack of control Jesus has all of this in control. So therefore, part of the lack of their understanding is making sure that the timeline progresses as it is supposed to. It's intriguing to me that Peter is the first to act. We see that quite often, don't we, when it comes to Peter? And he then becomes one more witness to an empty tomb. There's an intriguing phrase here at the end of that passage that Peter went away wondering to himself what had happened. That really could be translated in some versions. It says marveling. He went away marveling. I just think it means he was awestruck. And I do believe that it's intended here in a very, very positive light, that it's not like dumbfounded. That's not the way to look at it. It's just, I think he is just overcome with awe, probably a tremendous amount of conviction here of his own sin, and knowing that he's going to see Jesus again. He's raised from the dead. And so how's that going to play out? What's going to happen there? And then of course we note from looking at their reunion in John chapter 21 that it's very beautiful, poignant scene in their relationship. So there's a whole lot more that we could look at tonight, but we're going to go ahead and stop there. When we get back together next Wednesday evening, Tyler and Jana may want to contribute some additional thoughts to this particular section, but hopefully this evening we've gotten a good head start. If you have any questions or observations, please don't hesitate to shoot me a note this week, and we can unpack that next Wednesday night when we get together. Between now and then, please read several times Luke chapter 24, and look forward to sharing that last class in this series with you 1 week from tonight. Appreciate you all tuning in, and I pray that you have a wonderful rest of the week. We look forward to seeing you Sunday, if not before. Good night, everybody.